it's got very little water in it. It's very low. In conditions like this, I mean, I think the Hungarians and the British teams are quite strong, but the most opposition would come from the other Springbok sides, I would say.
I'm not too sure whether the guys will stand up to the snow conditions. I think you'll find the South African boats will be in front after half an hour, and that's the way it's going to finish.
I speak small English.
Okay, just a little bit.
Dus voor ons wat van Namibië afkom wat nie vir riviere gewoond is, is dit werklik baie iets fantasties.
The river's pretty low at the moment, so river tactics will be very important, getting the channels right. I believe if you take the wrong channel, there's some sandbanks ahead. Could make it interesting, but it should be a good race. The competition is very good at the moment.
Oh, the conditions are they are a lot different from what we are used to in Sweden. But last time I was not that good prepared, but this time we have been there for a couple of days, and we've also been paddling at the berg, and we've been here. So I think the team they are ready for it.
I think the water is a little bit too low, but I think it's good for us, for overseas paddlers.
Well, I think the Breede is a lot better than the berg. It's a lot wider, and the channels are a bit more obvious. So give it best shot.
So now, after the mountains and the roads, it's onto the Breede River between Drew and Swellendam for the first full international Grand Prix marathon series hosted locally. The start of the K2s and 3 boats from South Africa up against 1 each from Hungary, Great Britain and Namibia in what was to become an absorbing race. And so, with the K2s out of the way, the international K1s take their place at the start line, including paddlers from South Africa, Hungary, Sweden, Great Britain, Belgium, Namibia, Brazil and Swaziland. So it's very much an international field that breaks away from the line for the start of the race. And with the men off and running, the women take their place, including South Africa's Eintjie Manfroni.
I expect competition, especially from the Swedes and from the Hungarians, but I don't think they've got that much experience on the river, so I think I've still got a good chance.
Only 2 boats in the women's K2 class, a straight race between Angus Rodi and Andrea Biro of Hungary and South Africa's top women's pair of Sandra Erdley and Rory Bohm. While in the women's K1s, 4 boats make the start, with some strong competition expected between Eintjie Manfroni, Assa Eklund of Sweden and the 2 Hungarian paddlers. The weather just about perfect for a race like this, and only the low level of the river possibly making things a little awkward. The first waterfall, and no one shooting this one because the international paddlers are unprepared for these sort of conditions, as well as the fact that no one wants to risk their boats with the Berg River Marathon just a few days after this one. So that means a compulsory portage, and South African pair of Donnie Malherbe and Richard van Mansberg show the way to go for the rest of the pack just behind. Portage is a skill which can win or lose a race at times, and this pair really know how to make things move over land when it's necessary, although with all those sharp rocks around, no one is sprinting yet. Neil Evans and Graham Bird right on the heels of Malherbe and van Mansberg, followed by British pair of Neil Coleman and James Smythe. At last, the downside of the waterfall is reached and the boats put back into the water, neither of the 2 leading pairs having gained an advantage. And while South Africans Lo Malherbe and Christa Vaal disappear into the distance ahead of them, the Hungarian pair of Zoltan Nage and Thomas Pinter struggled, not used to African conditions, although brilliant on the flat water. Right behind the K2s, Alan van Coller leads the charge in the portage in the K1 class ahead of fellow South African Moray Wilson, with Britain's Simon Dark and Belgium's Eric Verdijk right on their heels. Some prefer to carry, some to drag the boats across the portage, although that's a definite risk of damaging something. Paul Byrne too sick with flu to worry much about that. Back in the water and their natural environment, the Hungarian pair give chase and start to catch up on the leading K2s once again. Lo Malherbe and Christa Vaal and the British pair also starting to pull back the gap, and the 2 leading boats have opened up. And there's no rest up at the front either. Malherbe and van Mansberg setting a blistering pace with frequent sprints, but Evans and Bird somehow managing to come back each time. Though Malherbe struggling with both Blue and the British pair trying desperately with partner Christobal to keep hold of third. The Hungarian pair have set off without splash covers, which makes things very awkward when the water gets a little rough, slowing them down badly and allowing a gap to open up. Happily staying a little way behind the leaders, Bird and Evans were following precisely in their wake to make use of Donnie Malherbe's knowledge of the river and the various channels and allowing them to break the path for them. But those tactics meant that there was no chance to pass the leaders, so Bird and Evans started to work harder and pick their own channels, trying to get past with some sort of gap that they could capitalize on. At the same time, Malherbe and van Mansberg knew that the other pair were better sprinters at the end, which meant that they were neck and neck once again, passing under the railway line at the Red Bridge. Women's K2 class, the Hungarian pair were carefully keeping Eardley and Bohm of South Africa firmly in their sights, while Ankie Manfroni was setting the pace in the K1 section ahead of the Swedish and Hungarian paddlers. But while the ladies were still on the portage, the leading K2 men had reached the stretch of the river known as the Golden Mile, where smooth, easy conditions make for fast paddling and quick times, as well as allowing the contestants to take it easy and recover some strength. Though Malherbe and Christobal were managing to stay up with the very experienced British pair of Coleman and Smythe, despite Malherbe's poor condition from the flu. And with Simon Dark having smashed the nose of his canoe, forcing him to constantly pump out of the boat with a foot pump, Alan van Coller was looking very strong. Eric Verdijk, the Belgium and local paddler Moray Wilson were up with him, but keeping things cool as they tried to save their strength for the final sprint. Up ahead at the compulsory portage at the weir, Malherbe and van Mansberg were catching up to the junior men and women who had started before them, trying to keep things on the boil to stay up with Evans and Bird, who had opened up a small gap. And not too far behind them, Malherbe and De Waal with the British pair were starting to cut into the lead. And things were getting hectic now as several classes started to get mixed up at the weir portage. The Namibian pair of Johan Kriel and Bremer van Eyck at the back of the K2s were being caught by the leading K1s, although Simon Dark was dropping back due to the crumpled nose section on his boat. The K1s reach the weir and the leaders sprint across the portage section, too close to the finish to allow any time for rest now. Behind them, the women's K2 race was as close as ever. South Africans Eardley and Bohm working hard to stay up with the Hungarian pair of Erodi and Biro, who were keeping the pace on hard, despite looking very cool and relaxed. This was the South African pair's first taste of international competition at this level, and were acquitting themselves well. And although finding the strength of the Hungarians something of a surprise, they were keeping up the pace despite the braking tactics that Erodi and Biro threw at them. Not too far behind the leading women in the K2 class, the K1 girls were involved in a similar battle. Ankie Manfroni was paddling an excellent race, keeping right on the shoulder of the Swedish paddler Assa Elkland, the two Hungarian K1 women having dropped back along the way. But all the attention was on the end of the men's K2 races. Donnie Malherbe and Richard van Mansberg just failed to catch Neil Evans and Graham Bird.
Donnie and Richard worked us over initially, but they managed to break the bunch down. The two of us got away, and from then on it was jostling through the rapids. They got ahead at one stage, but we managed to get ahead of them just before the end straight here, and we were able to hold them off for a good win.
A good win for Neil Evans, who will captain the South African team to the Worlds in Spain later this year. And a good win as well for Alan van Coller, who just managed to hold up the Belgian paddler Eric Verdijk in the K1s.
I'm not used to the rivers like these in South Africa, but I managed to stay with the South Africans, so I'm very happy with my performance.
Yeah, Eric paddled really well, because we had the advantage in knowing what to do in the channels, going hard in the channels, and he was always last into the channels, but he managed to come back each time, and he was very strong the whole way through the race.
So do you see him as a threat for the Berg River Marathon next week?
Yeah, I think he could do something. If he trips the river and gets to know it a little bit,
He seemed to handle the channels very well. He didn't, he wasn't unstable or anything. He paddled well through the channels.
And Simon Dock, until he had his problems.
Yeah,
with
he was also looking very comfortable.
So you're looking forward to a good scrap on the berg next week?
Yeah, I think they might do something on the berg.
But doing something this week, Rodi and Bero sprinting at the line to just hold off the South African women in the K2s, who put up an excellent fight all the way to the finish, less than a half a second back. And another win for the local paddlers as Ainki Manfroni makes it home ahead of Asa Eklund, still looking strong as she crosses the line in first place.
It was very tough paddling. It was the first time Rory and I have ever paddled against anybody international. And we found them extremely strong in the flat water, and we're going to have to do a little bit of hard work before we go to Spain.
It went very well, but I had to paddle a very hard race. The Swedish girl really also did a lot of work and I enjoyed it.